The music was too loud, the champagne too warm, and the polite smile plastered on Anna's face was beginning to cramp her jaw. Lord Harrington leaned in close, catching her eye. For a singular, foolish second, she thought he might actually ask her to dance. Instead, his gaze darted over her shoulder. "Your sister, Arabella," he murmured, adjusting his perfectly starched cravat. "Does she favor a waltz?" It was the fourth time tonight. Anna was not a woman. She was a waiting room. The season was not a romantic whirlwind of stolen glances and sweeping strings. It was an auction block. Anna stood near a cluster of wilting ferns, nursing a glass of lemonade that tasted entirely of sour lemons and regret. The ballroom of the Earl of Stanhope was stifling. 200 bodies crammed into a space designed for half that, all radiating heat, ambition, and the cloying scent of heavily perfumed desperation. A few feet away, her sister Arabella held court. Arabella was a masterpiece of genetics and their mother's relentless grooming. She had hair the color of spun gold, eyes like clear summer skies, and a laugh that sounded like a silver bell. Men orbited her. They brought her ices. They fought to write their names on her dance card. On the other side of the room, near the musicians, her youngest sister Cecilia was causing a different kind of stir. Cecilia was fire to Arabella's ice, dark-haired, vivacious, prone to laughing a little too loudly and touching a gentleman's arm just a second too long. And then there was Anna. She was 22, which in the eyes of the ton meant she was already standing with one foot in the grave of spinsterhood. She possessed brown hair that refused to hold a curl and eyes the color of muddy river water. She was perfectly ordinary. She wore a gown of muted sage green, not because she liked the color, but because her mother had decreed that her dress must not clash with Arabella's radiant peach silk or Cecilia's bold crimson. A shadow fell over her. "Miss Anna." Anna looked up. Lord Carmichael was standing before her. He was young, nervous, and sweating through his collar. "Lord Carmichael," she said evenly, "a pleasant evening." "Indeed, splendid." He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. He looked over her head. He looked to her left. He swallowed hard. Anna sighed internally. She knew the script by heart. She decided to save them both the time. "Arabella has no more dances available before supper, my lord. However, she does take her tea in the park at 4 o'clock on Thursdays, usually near the Serpentine. She is particularly fond of candied almonds." Carmichael blinked, his cheeks turning a violent shade of pink. I beg your pardon? You came to ask about my sister. I am merely expediting the process. Candied almonds, Lord Carmichael, but not the ones from the corner shop on Bond Street. She finds them too sweet. Get them from Gunter's." "Thank you, Miss Anna." He bowed awkwardly and practically sprinted away. Anna took a slow sip of her terrible lemonade. She wasn't angry. Anger required energy she didn't possess. It was just a bone-deep exhaustion. She was the gatekeeper, the convenient, invisible stepping stone men used to reach the glittering prizes of her family. "You slouched again?" Lady Hawthorne materialized beside her, her voice a sharp hiss masked beneath a serene, aristocratic smile. "I was standing perfectly straight, Mother," Anna said without looking at her. "If you were standing straight, your shoulders wouldn't look quite so broad," her mother countered, snapping her fan open. "Did Lord Carmichael ask you to dance?" "No, he wanted to know about Arabella." Lady Hawthorne let out a sharp breath of approval. "Good. He has 3,000 a year. Not enough for Arabella, of course, but it keeps the competition fierce. You were polite, I hope." "Immaculately. See that you stay that way." Her mother scanned the room, her eyes darting with the tactical precision of a general surveying a battlefield. "We must secure a match for Arabella this season. The estate is bleeding money, Anna. Your brother's debts are mounting. If Arabella doesn't land a titled man, we will be ruined. And if we are ruined, who will marry Cecilia?" "And what about me?" Anna didn't ask. The answer was already understood. Anna was the middle child, the plain one. Her purpose was not to marry well. Her purpose was to facilitate, to manage, to step aside. She was to be the maiden aunt who lived in the drafty wing of Arabella's future grand estate, helping to raise the children. "I need some air," Anna murmured. Do not stray far, her mother warned, already stepping away to intercept an aging Viscount. And pinch your cheeks, you look like a corpse. Anna set her glass on a passing servant's tray and turned her back on the glittering room. She walked down the long, mirrored corridor. The music faded into a low, thumping bass. She didn't go to the terrace. The terrace was where young debutantes went to be compromised. Instead, she pushed open the heavy oak doors of the Stanhope Library. It was dark, lit only by a single candelabra left burning on a massive mahogany desk, and it smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and silence. It was heaven. She let her shoulders drop. She reached up and pulled out 2 hairpins that had been digging mercilessly into her scalp, releasing a breath she felt she'd been holding since she stepped out of the carriage. If you intend to take off the entire dress, I should warn you, I have not yet finished my brandy. Anna froze. A man was sitting in a deep leather wing-back chair in the corner of the room. His legs were stretched out, crossed at the ankles. In the dim light, she couldn't make out his features clearly, only the stark white of his cravat, the dark outline of a well-tailored evening coat, and the amber glint of liquid in the crystal glass he held. Anna's heart gave a dull, tired thud. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She merely sighed, quickly shoving the pins back into her hair. "My apologies," she said, her voice dry. "I thought the room was empty." It was, until I sought refuge in it. And then you sought refuge in it. I suppose it is now a sanctuary for the damned. He took a slow sip of his drink. His voice was deep, resonant, and laced with the same cynical exhaustion she felt in her own bones. "You don't sound very damned," Anna noted, taking a step back toward the door. "You sound like a man hiding from his host." "I am hiding from the mothers," he corrected. He gestured loosely with his glass toward the door. "It is a dangerous world out there tonight. A man cannot stand by the punch bowl for 3 seconds without being accosted by a matriarch wielding a remarkably dull daughter, like a weapon." Anna let out a short, surprised bark of laughter. She clapped a hand over her mouth, shocked by her own breach of decorum. The man shifted in his chair. He leaned forward into the soft light of the candles. Anna took him in. He wasn't classically handsome in the soft, powdered way the society boys were. His jaw was too sharp, his brow too heavy. He had dark hair swept back haphazardly, as if he had run his hands through it multiple times in frustration. There were lines of weariness around his eyes. He looked like a man who had fought a war, or perhaps simply survived too many London seasons. "You laugh," he said, his tone curious. "Are you not one of the daughters meant to be wielded?" "I am the defective merchandise," Anna said frankly, leaning against the door frame. The darkness offered a strange anonymity. She felt no need to perform. "I am kept in the back of the shop, while my sisters are put in the front window." He tilted his head. "They overlook you." "They look through me." Anna crossed her arms over her chest. "Usually to ask what time my elder sister takes her tea, or what sheet music my younger sister prefers. I am a directory of information disguised as a woman in a green dress." He looked at her, really looked at her. It was a stark, uncomfortably piercing gaze. Men never looked at Anna. They glanced, they skimmed. This man stared. "Green suits you," he said quietly. "It doesn't scream for attention. It simply exists, waiting for someone to have the sense to appreciate it." Anna felt a sudden, strange tightness in her chest. She pushed it down immediately. "Are you a poet, sir? Or just deep into that brandy?" A corner of his mouth twitched upward. "The latter, unfortunately. I'm entirely out of poetry." He stood up. He was tall, much taller than she had realized while he was sitting. He set the empty glass on the desk. "I should return before a search party is sent. If I am absent too long, they will assume I have fled to the continent." "Best of luck to you," Anna said, stepping aside to give him a wide berth. "Beware Lady Hawthorne. She is currently patrolling the east perimeter near the musicians. She takes no prisoners." He paused right beside her. He smelled of rain, clean linen, and fine tobacco. "I will keep that in mind. And you, Miss... Directory, what will you do?" "I will wait in the shadows until it is time to go home," Anna said, looking up at him. "It is what I do best." For a moment, He didn't move. He just looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Perhaps," he murmured, his voice low, "you're simply waiting for a man who knows how to ask the right question." He bowed, slightly and respectfully, and walked out the door. Anna stood in the quiet library for a long time, the scent of his tobacco lingering in the air. She felt strange, off balance. It was a ridiculous feeling. He was likely just a bored baron trying to amuse himself. When she finally returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The music had stopped playing a waltz and moved to a frantic reel. The air hummed with an electric, chaotic energy. Her mother grabbed her by the arm the second she stepped into the light, her fingernails digging painfully into Anna's flesh. "Where have you been?" Lady Hawthorne hissed, her face flushed red with genuine panic. "The library," Anna said, wincing. "Mother, you're hurting me." "He was here," her mother gasped, ignoring her. She pointed a trembling fan toward the grand entrance doors, which were currently closing behind a tall figure. "He was here for 20 minutes, and we missed him. I was stuck talking to Lord Fife, and Arabella was dancing with a mere knight." "Who was here?" Anna asked, rubbing her arm as her mother let go. "The Duke of Westford," Cecilia breathed, appearing beside them, her eyes wide. "He just arrived in London yesterday. They say he's looking for a wife to settle his estate. He has 50,000 a year, Anna, 50,000, and he owns half of Yorkshire." "He walked straight through the room, spoke to no one, went down the mirrored hall, and left," Lady Hawthorne lamented, looking as though she might weep. "The most desired man in England, and he slips through our fingers." Anna looked toward the hall. She thought of a man in a dark coat sitting in the shadows, hiding from the mothers. Her stomach performed a slow, heavy roll. "I'm sure," Anna said, her voice unusually quiet, "he will be at the next one." It took 3 days for the Duke of Westford to make another appearance, and society nearly tore itself apart in the waiting. The Danbury Ball was the premier event of the month. The ballroom was dripping in crystal chandeliers, the walls lined with white roses that must have cost a small fortune. But nobody was looking at the flowers. Every eye in the room was fixed on the grand staircase. Anna stood in her customary place by the perimeter, feeling a headache building behind her temples. Tonight, she wore a dull navy gown. Arabella was a vision in white silk and pearls, looking like an angel descended from the heavens. Her mother had positioned them strategically near the base of the stairs, a perfectly curated display of Hawthorne beauty. "Shoulders back, Arabella," Lady Hawthorne whispered fiercely. "Smile, but not too wide. You are a lady, not a barmaid. Cecilia, stop tapping your foot." Anna folded her hands in front of her. She had spent the last 3 days telling herself that the man in the library was not the Duke. It was a statistical improbability, a coincidence. And even if it was him, a 5-minute conversation in the dark meant nothing. Dukes did not marry ordinary women in green dresses who insulted the social season. They married Arabellas. "He is coming," Cecilia squeaked. The room fell into a sudden, terrifying hush. The string quartet at the far end of the room faltered, playing a few sour notes before dropping into silence. Arthur Pendleton, the Duke of Westford, stood at the top of the stairs. Anna's breath hitched. It was him. In the full glare of the chandeliers, he looked even more intimidating. He was dressed impeccably in black and silver, the severity of his clothes emphasizing the sharp, unforgiving lines of his face. He possessed an aura of absolute authority. He did not look bored tonight. He looked focused. He began to descend the stairs. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the synchronized rustle of 200 women adjusting their postures. He reached the floor. The crowd naturally parted for him, like water giving way to a ship's hull. He did not look left or right. He did not pause to greet his host. He was walking with a steady, measured pace directly toward the corner of the room, directly toward the Hawthornes. "He is coming here," Lady Hawthorne breathed, her voice shaking with a terrifying ecstasy. "Arabella, step forward, look down, then look up slowly. Anna, get out of the way." Anna did exactly as she was told. She took 2 large steps backward, sinking into the shadows of a massive marble pillar. She lowered her eyes to the polished floorboards, practicing her invisibility. This was the moment, the apex of her mother's career. The Duke was coming to claim the prize. Arabella stepped forward, her chin tipped down, a perfect demure smile playing on her lips. She looked breathtaking. The heavy, measured footsteps stopped. There was a pause. 2 seconds. 3. Anna waited to hear the deep rumble of his voice addressing her sister. She waited to see him offer his hand to Arabella. She kept her eyes glued to the floor. "Excuse me." The voice was rough, low, and cut through the silent room like a knife. "My Lord Duke," Lady Hawthorne's voice trembled, syrupy and triumphant. "May I present my eldest daughter, Miss Arabella?" "You are standing in my way, madam." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Anna's head snapped up. Arthur was standing directly in front of Lady Hawthorne and Arabella. He was not looking at Arabella's perfect white silk dress. He was not looking at her spun gold hair. He was looking over their shoulders, straight into the shadows, straight at Anna. Lady Hawthorne blinked, stunned into temporary muteness. She shuffled clumsily to the side, nearly tripping over Cecilia's hem. Arabella stood frozen, her demure smile cracking into a look of absolute bewilderment. Arthur took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between them. He stopped right in front of Anna. Up close, the silver threads in his waistcoat caught the light. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made her knees feel dangerously weak. The entire ballroom was holding its breath. The silence was deafening. Anna couldn't speak. Her mind went entirely blank. She stood in her dull navy dress, pressed against the cold marble pillar, staring up at the most powerful man in the room. He bowed, not the slight, cynical bow he had given her in the library, a deep, formal, flawless bow. He straightened and held out his hand. His white glove was stark against his dark coat. "Miss Hawthorne," he said. His voice carried, intentionally loud enough for every single person in a 50-foot radius to hear. "Your Grace," Anna managed to croak out, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't take his hand. She couldn't move. I believe you are mistaken, my sister Arabella." "I am perfectly aware of who your sister is," Arthur interrupted, his tone even but firm. He did not drop his hand. He stepped an inch closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I spent 2 hours enduring men talking about her perfection at my club yesterday. I have no interest in perfection." Anna stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. They ask about her. Everyone asks about her." Arthur's jaw tightened. He looked at her with a fierceness that stripped away the last of her cynical armor. "I came for you," he said, his voice a low, rough truth. "Not them." Anna felt the world tilt on its axis. She looked at his outstretched hand. She looked past his shoulder to her mother, whose jaw was practically resting on her collarbone, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and shock. She saw Arabella staring in uncomprehending silence. For 22 years, Anna had stepped back. She had made room. She had faded. She looked back up at Arthur. He was waiting. He was not rushing her. He was standing like a stone wall, shielding her from the hundreds of gaping stares, simply waiting for her to decide. Anna, slowly, with trembling fingers, lifted her hand and placed it in his. His grip was warm, strong, and entirely solid. He closed his fingers around hers, pulling her gently away from the pillar, out of the shadows, and into the blinding light of the ballroom. "They are playing a waltz, I believe," Arthur said smoothly, turning to lead her toward the center of the floor. "The orchestra isn't playing anything, Your Grace," Anna whispered, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes tracking their every move. Arthur glanced over his shoulder toward the musicians. He didn't shout. He simply gave the conductor a single dark look. 3 seconds later, the frantic, panicked scraping of bows against strings began, launching into the opening notes of a waltz. He pulled her into his arms. One hand held hers, the other settled firmly on the small of her back, pressing against the cheap navy silk. It was a scandalously tight hold. He stepped off, sweeping her onto the floor. "You did not tell me you were a duke," she breathed, her feet struggling to keep up with his powerful strides as they spun across the polished wood. "You did not ask," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "And you did not tell me you looked this captivating in navy blue. I am invisible." "You are blinding," he corrected quietly, "and I am incredibly tired of the dark." As they spun past the edge of the dance floor, Anna caught a final glimpse of her mother. Lady Hawthorne was leaning heavily against Lord Fife, frantically waving a smelling salt beneath her nose. For the first time in her life, Anna Hawthorne threw her head back and gave a genuine, radiant laugh. The morning sun did not care that the world had tilted on its axis. It poured through the tall windows of the Hawthorne breakfast room with a brutal, cheerful indifference. The toast was cold. The tea was bitter. The silence was absolute. Anna sat at the edge of her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the table, Arabella was systematically tearing a perfectly good piece of brioche into microscopic shreds. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though she managed to look tragically beautiful even in her distress. Cecilia was staring at Anna as if she had suddenly grown a second head. At the head of the table, Lady Hawthorne was pacing. The rhythmic thud-thud-thud of her sensible morning slippers against the Axminster rug sounded like a countdown to an explosion. "A political maneuver," Lady Hawthorne announced abruptly, breaking the agonizing silence. She stopped pacing and pointed a silver butter knife at the ceiling. "It is the only logical explanation. He's sending a message to the Duke of Rutland's faction, or perhaps he had a wager with Lord Fife. Yes, a wager." Anna looked down at her untouched plate. The cynical armor she had worn for 22 years, momentarily stripped away by a waltz and a pair of dark eyes, began to pull itself back into place, piece by heavy piece. Of course it was a maneuver. Arthur Pendleton was a duke. Dukes did not marry the spinster middle sister who wore drab colors and hid in libraries. They played games. They made statements. They moved people like pieces on a chessboard. Last night, Anna had been a remarkably convenient pawn. "He looked right past me," Arabella whispered, her voice catching. It was the first time she had spoken all morning. She looked down at her hands, genuinely bewildered. "Did I have a smudge on my nose? Was my posture incorrect?" "Do not be absurd, Arabella. You were flawless," Lady Hawthorne snapped, resuming her pacing. "This has nothing to do with you. This is about power. He wanted to shock the room, and he chose the most—" She glanced at Anna, her eyes raking over Anna's plain brown morning dress. She cleared her throat. The most unexpected avenue to do so. The most pathetic avenue. The unsaid words hung thickly in the air. "He danced with her for 15 minutes. Mother?" Cecilia chimed in, leaning her chin on her hand. "And he didn't even look at the ceiling once. He looked right at Anna, the whole time." "He was establishing the ruse," Lady Hawthorne dismissed with a wave of her hand. "By noon today, the entire ton will have forgotten it. We must focus on the task at hand. Lord Harrington is calling at 3. Arabella, you will wear the blue muslin. Anna, you will—" The heavy oak door of the breakfast room swung open. Higgins, the Hawthorne's aging butler, stood in the threshold. He looked pale. In his white-gloved hand, he held a silver salver. Resting precisely in the center of the tray was a thick cream-colored calling card bearing a heavy wax seal. Lady Hawthorne stopped breathing. Higgins cleared his throat. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "The Duke of Westford, my lady. He awaits in the drawing room." Arabella gasped, her hands flying to her cheeks. Cecilia knocked over her teacup, sending a brown stain spreading across the linen tablecloth. Lady Hawthorne stared at the silver tray as if it contained a live explosive. "He is here!" Lady Hawthorne hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, sudden, manic energy. The political maneuvering theory vanished in an instant. Survival instinct took over. He realized his mistake. He has come for Arabella. Quickly, Arabella, bite your lips to bring out the color. Cecilia, go upstairs. You are too young for morning callers of this magnitude. Higgins. "Yes, my lady." "Tell His Grace we will be down in exactly 4 minutes. Serve him the good sherry, the one we hid from my husband." "I beg your pardon, my lady," Higgins said, his voice terribly gentle. He did not move. He looked past Lady Hawthorne, his eyes settling directly on Anna. His Grace was quite specific. He has requested an audience solely with Miss Anna. The room went entirely, violently still. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at her mother. Lady Hawthorne's mouth was slightly open, a portrait of absolute, uncomprehending shock. "That's a mistake," Lady Hawthorne managed to say. "Higgins, your hearing is failing." "My hearing is perfectly intact, my lady," Higgins replied evenly. He said, and I quote, "Please inform Miss Anna that if she does not come down in 5 minutes, I will come up and fetch her myself, regardless of the scandal it will undoubtedly cause." Anna closed her eyes. Her chest tightened. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a political maneuver. He was actually here. She stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. She didn't look at her mother or her sisters. She smoothed her hands down the front of her plain brown dress, feeling the rough fabric against her palms, grounding herself. "I suppose," Anna said, her voice remarkably steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart, "I should not keep him waiting." She walked past her frozen family, out the door, and down the long hallway toward the drawing room. Every step felt like walking to a scaffold. She paused at the double doors. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and pushed them open. Arthur was standing by the fireplace. He was not wearing the severe black and silver of the previous night. He wore a perfectly tailored riding coat of deep charcoal, buff breeches, and tall boots that carried the faint scent of leather and dust. He looked entirely out of place in their frayed, heavily floral drawing room. He looked too large, too real. He turned as she entered. His eyes swept over her, taking in the severe bun at the nape of her neck, the lack of rouge on her cheeks, the thoroughly uninspiring brown dress. He did not grimace. He smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it reached his eyes. "Miss Hawthorne," he said. "Your Grace." Anna stayed near the door. "To what do I owe the honor of this unprecedented panic you have caused my household?" "I came to take you for a drive." "A drive?" Anna crossed her arms defensively. "In a carriage, through the park." "In my phaeton, and yes, through the park. It is a remarkably sunny day. I am told people do this sort of thing." "I do not do this sort of thing," she said flatly. "I sit in the back of drawing rooms and tell gentlemen what my sister's favorite flowers are." Arthur took a few steps toward her. The casual distance between them vanished. "I know nothing about flowers, but I do know that my horses are growing restless, and I have a distinct desire to spend the next hour in your company. Will you come with me, Anna? Or must I endure another lecture from your mother?" He used her Christian name. It was entirely improper. It sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine. She looked at him. Really looked at him. There was no mockery in his expression, only a quiet, immovable certainty. "Let me fetch my police," she whispered. The open carriage was a masterclass in intimidation. It was glossy black, perched precariously high on bright yellow wheels, pulled by a matching pair of terrifyingly large, restless black geldings. Arthur handed her up onto the leather seat with effortless strength. He did not bring a groom. It was just the two of them, exposed to the world high above the cobblestones. As they entered the gates of Hyde Park, the effect was immediate. The fashionable hour was just beginning. Carriages lined the pathways, women twirled parasols, men tipped their hats, and the moment the Duke of Westford's distinctive yellow-wheeled phaeton appeared, every single head turned. Anna felt the physical weight of 100 stares hitting her at once. It was suffocating. She shrank back against the leather squabs, wishing she could dissolve into the upholstery. She could hear the whispers rising over the clatter of hooves like the buzzing of a disturbed hive. Who is she? Hawthorne's middle girl. The plain one. Why is he with her? Arthur's hands were steady on the leather ribbons. He guided the massive horses through a tight turn, his profile sharp and unbothered. "They are staring," Anna said, her voice tight. "Let them," Arthur replied, not looking away from the path. "They are wondering why the most powerful man in England is driving through the park with a woman who looks like a governess." Arthur pulled back slightly on the reins, slowing the horses to a gentle walk. He turned his head to look at her. The midday sun caught the harsh angles of his face. "They are wondering," he corrected quietly, "why a man who has his pick of the glittering flock has chosen the only bird with the sense not to sing for her supper." Anna let out a harsh, involuntary breath. "Do not romanticize me, Your Grace. I am not a rebel. I am just tired." "Arthur." "What?" "My name is Arthur. If we are to be the subject of London's gossip for the next decade, you might as well use it." Anna stared at his gloved hands. "You are playing a very cruel game. I don't know the rules. I don't know what you want from me." He pulled the horses to a complete stop beneath the sprawling branches of a massive oak tree, ignoring a passing barouche entirely. He turned his body on the seat to face her fully. I want a partner, he said. The gravel in his voice was gone, replaced by a stark, absolute honesty. I inherited this title 3 months ago. My brother was a fool who drank himself into an early grave and left the estates in chaos. I spent the last 10 years in the army, managing men who were bleeding into the mud. I know nothing of ballrooms, Anna. I despise the simpering, the fawning, the endless, exhausting performance of it all. He leaned closer. Yesterday, I watched you for 20 minutes before I approached you. I watched you manage 3 different men, steering them toward your sisters with the tactical brilliance of a field marshal. I watched your mother berate you, and I watched you absorb it, without flinching, without breaking. You see the mechanics of this world. You see the ugliness beneath the silk. Anna swallowed hard. I see it because I am not allowed to participate in it. You are participating in it right now, Arthur said gently. He reached out. He didn't ask permission. He took her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm and grounding. I do not want a woman who will faint when the estate accounts do not balance. I do not want a woman who requires constant praise to survive the day. I want someone who can stand in the dark with me and not be afraid. Anna looked down at their joined hands. The cynicism that had protected her for so long was screaming at her to pull away, to laugh it off, to tell him he was mistaken. But looking at him, at the weariness around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the desperate truth in his grip, she saw a reflection of her own exhaustion. He wasn't a fairy tale prince. He was a tired man looking for an equal. My mother will demand a terrifying settlement, Anna heard herself say. The words were a test, a final attempt to push reality back into the fantasy. Arthur's mouth twitched into a genuine smile. I own half of Yorkshire, Anna. I think I can afford your mother. Arabella will cry for a week. I will send her a very large diamond to dry her tears. Anna finally looked up, meeting his dark eyes, the suffocating weight of the park, the stairs, the whispers. It all seemed to fade into a dull background hum. There was only the leather seat, the dappled sunlight through the oak leaves, and the solid, undeniable reality of the man beside her. I do not like the social season, Anna warned him, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. Then, Miss Hawthorne, he said, we shall go home. The return to the Hawthorne residence was not a triumphant procession. It felt like a military extraction. Arthur pulled the phaeton to a halt before the weathered stone steps of the townhouse. Before his groom could even reach the horses' heads, the front door swung open. Lady Hawthorne stood on the threshold, framed by the doorway like a gargoyle defending its nest. Anna didn't wait for Arthur to assist her. She climbed down, her boots hitting the pavement with a solid, grounding thud. Arthur was beside her a second later, his presence a sudden, massive wall between her and her mother's impending hysteria. They walked up the steps together. Your Grace, Lady Hawthorne breathed, her eyes darting frantically between Arthur's impassive face and Anna's surprisingly calm one. I trust the park was agreeable. It was crowded, Arthur replied simply. He did not wait for an invitation. He stepped past Lady Hawthorne, taking Anna with him, and walked straight into the drawing room. Arabella and Cecilia were exactly where Anna had left them, frozen in a tableau of anxious waiting. Arabella's eyes widened at the sight of Arthur's hand resting casually on the small of Anna's back. Leave us, Arthur said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at the sisters. It was a command issued with the absolute bone-deep authority of a man used to being obeyed instantly. Cecilia grabbed Arabella's arm and practically dragged her out of the room. The doors clicked shut. Lady Hawthorne remained, her chest heaving beneath her restrictive corset. She looked at Anna, a terrifying mixture of calculation and panic swimming in her eyes. The political maneuver theory was dead. Now she had to pivot. She was a woman who had spent 20 years surviving on social scraps. She knew how to salvage a shipwreck. I am a man who prefers brevity, Lady Hawthorne, Arthur began, dropping his hand from Anna and turning to face her mother. He stood in the center of the faded floral rug, making the room look entirely too small. I intend to marry Anna. The banns will be read on Sunday. We will marry by special license before the end of the month. Lady Hawthorne opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. Anna. She tested the name as if it tasted like copper. You wish to marry Anna. I just said so. But Arabella? Arabella is a remarkably beautiful young woman who will undoubtedly find a husband who appreciates her specific talents, Arthur cut in smoothly. I am not that man. I want Anna. Lady Hawthorne's gaze snapped to her middle daughter. It was not a look of maternal pride. It was the sharp, assessing glare of an appraiser who had just realized a dusty vase in the corner was actually Ming Dynasty porcelain. The Hawthorne estate is encumbered, Lady Hawthorne stated abruptly. The pretense of romance vanished. The mask dropped. This was the battlefield she understood. My son's debts are substantial. If you take Anna, you take her without a dowry. Anna flinched. It was a truth she knew intimately, but hearing it weaponized in this room, laid bare before Arthur, brought a hot flush of shame to her cheeks. She looked down at her hands. I do not need a dowry, Arthur said. His voice was cold enough to freeze water. And her sisters? Lady Hawthorne pressed on, stepping closer, smelling blood. Arabella requires a proper season. Cecilia will need a sponsor next year. As a duke, your connection to our family. Stop. Arthur took one step forward. The sheer physical menace of his size forced Lady Hawthorne to take a step back. Let us be entirely clear about the terms of this arrangement, Arthur said, his tone dropping to a dangerous quiet register. I am marrying Anna. I'm not marrying your debts, your son's gambling habits, or your social ambitions. I will settle £5,000 upon your son's estate, effectively clearing his immediate markers. I will establish a trust of £2,000 each for Arabella and Cecilia, accessible upon their marriages. Lady Hawthorne's eyes gleamed with a hungry, desperate light. It was more money than she had seen in a decade. However, Arthur continued, his voice hardening like forged steel, in exchange for this capital, you will release Anna entirely. You will not write to her demanding funds. You will not send your son to my door. You will not leverage my title to secure invitations to houses where you are entirely unwanted. If you do, I will freeze the trusts and bleed your son's estate dry through the courts. Do we understand one another? Silence descended on the room. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. Anna stared at Arthur. He had just bought her. It was a crude, ugly thought, but it was the truth. He had assessed her family's desperate machinery and dismantled it with a single brutal stroke of his checkbook. Lady Hawthorne swallowed hard. Her posture stiffened. She looked at the man who had just insulted her, threatened her, and secured her family's future in the span of 60 seconds. The terms are acceptable, Your Grace, she managed to say, her voice tight. Excellent. Arthur turned his back on her, dismissing her entirely. He looked at Anna. The coldness vanished from his face, replaced by that same quiet certainty she had seen in the carriage. Pack your trunks, Anna. We leave for Yorkshire 3 days after the wedding. He didn't wait for her to agree. He walked to the door, opened it, and left. The front door slammed shut a moment later. It was a final sound. Lady Hawthorne slowly turned to look at Anna. For a long, painful minute, neither woman spoke. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently the air still felt displaced. You, Lady Hawthorne whispered, shaking her head slowly. Of all of you. It is you. Anna stood up straighter. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt deeply, profoundly tired. But it was a new kind of tired. A clean one. Yes, Mother, Anna said, her voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. It is me. She walked past her mother and began the long climb up the stairs to pack her bags. The wedding was a brief, sterile affair in a cold, echoing church in Mayfair. There were no white roses. There was no choir. Arabella stood in the back pew, weeping softly into a lace handkerchief. Whether from relief or resentment, Anna didn't know and didn't ask. Cecilia looked bored. Lady Hawthorne looked like a cat who had swallowed a very large, very rich canary. Anna wore a tailored traveling dress of deep charcoal gray. Arthur wore his military bearing. They spoke their vows in low, even voices, signed the massive parish register, and walked out the door. Within the hour, they were in a heavy, unmarked traveling carriage heading north. The journey took 4 grueling days. As they left the manicured borders of London behind, the landscape began to change. The polite, rolling hills of the south gave way to harsher, darker terrain. The sky seemed wider here, heavy with gray clouds that threatened constant rain. They did not speak much. The silence in the carriage was not tense, but it was heavy with the sheer weight of what they had done. They were 2 strangers chained together by a mutual desire to escape the lives they had been handed. On the afternoon of the 4th day, the carriage turned off the main road onto a long, rutted drive lined with ancient twisted oak trees. Anna leaned forward, looking out the rain-streaked window. Stonecross Hall rose from the moorland like a fortress. It was massive, built of dark, rough-hewn stone that looked wet even when it wasn't raining. There was nothing delicate about it. It lacked the symmetrical Palladian windows and the sprawling, terraced gardens of the estates Anna had seen in the south. It was a house built to withstand sieges and brutal winters. It looked exactly like the man sitting across from her. The carriage lurched to a halt in the central courtyard. There was no grand line of servants waiting to greet them, only a solitary, stooped man standing under the stone portico, holding a lantern against the gloom. Arthur pushed the carriage door open and stepped out into the freezing wind. He turned and offered his hand. Anna took it. She stepped down, the wind immediately biting through her heavy wool cloak. "Welcome to Yorkshire," Arthur said. His voice was flat. He looked up at the massive dark facade of the house. For the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "It is a bit of a grim ruin, I'm afraid. My brother did not care for upkeep. He preferred the tables in London to the drafts here." Anna looked at the overgrown weeds pushing through the cobblestones. She noticed a shutter hanging loose on the 2nd floor, banging rhythmically against the stone in the wind. She saw the dust coating the lower windows. It was a mess. "It is not a ruin," Anna said softly. She didn't offer empty reassurances. She dealt in facts. "It is just neglected. It needs a firm hand and a thorough scrubbing." Arthur looked down at her, surprise flashing in his dark eyes. "Mr. Dawson," Arthur called out, turning to the older man holding the lantern. "This is the Duchess of Westford. We will need fires in the master suite and whatever hot food the kitchens can manage." Dawson bowed stiffly. "Yes, Your Grace." "Welcome, Your Grace." They walked inside. If the exterior was imposing, the interior was cavernous. The entrance hall was built of cold gray flagstones. The walls were lined with massive darkened portraits of Pendleton ancestors who all looked remarkably displeased to be there. The air smelled of old wood smoke, damp wool, and dust. Arthur stopped in the center of the hall. He looked around the desolate space, his jaw tight. He had commanded regiments. He had survived war. But standing in the wreckage of his family's legacy, he looked momentarily paralyzed. "I should have sent an advance party," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "I should have had them clean it before bringing you here. You are used to better." "I'm used to hiding in corners and managing my mother's ledgers to keep the butcher at bay," Anna corrected him, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty hall. She let go of her travel bag. It hit the stone floor with a heavy thud. She unfastened the clasp of her cloak, letting the heavy wool fall over the bag. She walked over to a massive mahogany side table that was thick with dust. She ran a single gloved finger through the grime, leaving a stark, clean line behind. She turned back to Arthur. He was watching her, perfectly still. "You said you wanted a partner, Arthur," Anna said, her voice steady and clear in the gloom. "You said you didn't want a woman who would faint when things did not balance." "I did." "Good." Anna began to unbutton her gloves, pulling them off one by one and tossing them onto the table. "Because the first thing we are going to do tomorrow is fire whoever is in charge of the housekeeping. The second thing we are going to do is sit down with the estate ledgers. And the third thing we are going to do is open every single window in this house." Arthur stared at her. The tension that had been gripping his shoulders since they crossed the Yorkshire border slowly began to bleed away. A low, genuine laugh rumbled in his chest, echoing in the cold hall. "You're a terrifying woman, Anna," he said, stepping toward her. "You bought me," she reminded him, looking up as he closed the distance between them. "You get what you paid for." Arthur reached out. He didn't pull her into a desperate embrace. He simply cupped the side of her face, his thumb brushing against her cheekbone. His hand was warm against the freezing air of the hall. "I underpaid," he whispered. For the first time in 22 years, Anna Hawthorne felt entirely, undeniably seen. The transformation of Stonecross Hall did not happen in a montage of sweeping music and sudden sunlight. It happened in the grueling, unglamorous trenches of daily labor. It happened with lye soap, cracked knuckles, and the sharp scent of beeswax. Anna dismissed the housekeeper on their third morning. The woman had been stealing from the pantries and letting the damp rot into the eastern wing. Anna promoted a stern, fiercely competent scullery maid named Mrs. Higgins to the position. Together, they waged a brutal war against a decade of accumulated filth. Windows were thrown open to the biting moorland winds. Rugs were dragged into the courtyard and beaten until the air grew thick with dust. Arthur did not sit in a leather chair and watch. He rode out every morning at dawn. He fired the corrupt bailiff. He waded into freezing streams to inspect broken mills. He sat in the cottages of terrified tenant farmers, listening to their grievances, his massive frame dwarfing their small wooden chairs, promising repairs he fully intended to execute. They were two generals fighting a war on two fronts, and the command center was the library. It became their nightly ritual. After supper, they retreated to the heavy oak-paneled room. Arthur would take the desk, surrounded by maps of the estate and crop yields. Anna would sit at the large central table, a mountain of estate ledgers stacked before her, a smudge of black ink permanently staining the side of her index finger. The silence between them was not the tense, suffocating silence of a London ballroom. It was a working silence. It was comfortable. It was thick with mutual respect. "He sold the timber rights in the North Valley for a fraction of their worth," Anna stated one Tuesday in late October. Rain was lashing against the thick glass of the windows, but a massive fire roared in the hearth, throwing a warm, flickering light across the room. Arthur didn't look up from his map. He merely rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of exhaustion she had come to recognize. "My brother possessed a unique talent for finding the worst possible bargain and taking it with immense pride. Can we buy them back?" Anna ran a finger down the column of jagged, drunken numbers in the ledger. "Not this quarter. We need the liquid capital for the roof repairs on the tenant farms before the snow sets in. But if we divert the funds from the defunct hunting lodge in the spring, we can outbid the current leaseholder next autumn." Arthur finally looked up. The firelight caught the harsh planes of his face. The exhaustion was still there, but the hollow, haunted look he had carried in London was gone. He looked at her not as a wife to be managed, but as a lifeline he had successfully grabbed hold of. "Divert the funds," he agreed. He set his pen down. "You've been staring at those numbers for 4 hours, Anna. Your eyes are going to cross." "The numbers do not care if my eyes cross. They require balancing." Arthur stood up. He walked around the desk, his boots heavy on the Persian rug, one of the few things Mrs. Higgins had managed to salvage from the damp. He stopped behind her chair. Anna stiffened slightly, but she did not pull away. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs pressed into the tight knotted muscles at the base of her neck. He was not gentle. He was firm, digging into the tension that had settled there from hours of hunching over the books. Anna let out a long, involuntary sigh. She let her head drop forward, closing her eyes as the agonizing knot in her shoulder began to release under his grip. "You work too hard," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble right above her ear. "I'm protecting my investment, Arthur," she murmured, opening her eyes to look at the ink-stained ledger. "If you go bankrupt, I will be forced to return to my mother and admit she was right about something. I would rather die." A soft, genuine laugh vibrated in his chest, traveling down his arms and into her shoulders. "We are far from bankruptcy, because of you." He didn't move away. He kept his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone beneath the high neck of her practical wool dress. The touch was completely absent of the performative gallantry of the ton. It was grounded. It was real. "I received a letter from my solicitor today." Arthur said quietly, the humor fading from his tone. "The trusts for your sisters have been finalized. The funds for your brother's debts have been transferred. The transaction is complete." Anna stared at the flickering firelight reflecting on the polished wood of the table. The transaction. It was the word they had built this entirely functional, deeply necessary life upon. But hearing it now, in the quiet warmth of the library, it felt hollow. "I see," she said. Her voice felt tight. Arthur's hand slid down her arms. He leaned down, his face coming level with hers. "I'm telling you this," he said, turning her chair slightly so she was forced to look at him, "because it means you owe them nothing. You owe me nothing. The contract is fulfilled." Anna searched his dark eyes. They were intensely focused on hers, stripping away every defense she possessed. "And what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur reached out and took her ink-stained hand in his. He brought it to his mouth and pressed a kiss right over the dark smudge on her finger. "Now," he said, "we build a life. Not because we have to, because we choose to." Winter hit Yorkshire with a brutal, unapologetic violence. The snow fell in heavy, blinding sheets, isolating Stonecross Hall from the rest of the world. In London, the winter season would be in full swing. Sleigh rides through Hyde Park, intimate dinners, vicious gossip over warm wine. Anna did not miss it, not for a single second. She stood by the window in the morning room, holding a cup of hot, strong tea, watching the wind whip the snow across the moors. The house was warm, the fires were lit, the pantries were full, and the roof did not leak. They had survived their first season. A throat cleared behind her. Dawson stood in the doorway, holding a silver tray. He looked entirely different from the stooped, defeated man who had greeted them months ago. His livery was brushed, his posture straight. "The post-rider managed to get through, Your Grace," Dawson said, extending the tray. Resting on the silver was a single thick envelope. The paper was heavy, the seal a bright, obnoxious crimson wax stamped with the hawthorn crest. Anna felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, entirely unrelated to the weather outside. She set her teacup down and took the letter. "Thank you, Dawson. That will be all." She waited until he closed the door before breaking the seal. The heavy scent of her mother's cloying rosewater wafted from the parchment. It was exactly what she expected. It was 3 pages of frantic underline-heavy script. Arabella had secured an offer from the Earl of Coventry, a man 30 years her senior with a terrifying reputation, but a massive fortune. Lady Hawthorne was ecstatic. Cecilia was causing trouble, flirting with a penniless cavalry officer. The brother needed another £1,000 to settle a misunderstanding at a card club. At the very bottom, almost as an afterthought, Lady Hawthorne had written, "I trust the North is not entirely unbearable. Do try to remind the Duke that a sponsor for Cecilia next season would not go unappreciated, given the generosity of our family in parting with you." Anna read the letter twice. For 22 years, this piece of paper would have dictated her emotional state for a month. It would have meant hours of calculating, managing, and enduring her mother's sharp rebukes. It would have meant shrinking herself down to fit into the tiny, dark box her family had built for her. She walked over to the fireplace. The flames were licking hungrily at a massive oak log. Anna didn't hesitate. She tossed the 3 pages of heavy parchment directly into the center of the fire. She watched the edges curl, turn black, and burst into bright orange flames. She watched the crimson wax melt and drip into the ash. She watched the demands, the guilt, and the subtle cruelties turn into smoke and vanish up the chimney. "I was going to suggest we frame it just to remind ourselves how lucky we are." Anna turned. Arthur was standing in the doorway. He was still wearing his heavy riding coat, his boots dusted with snow, his hair damp from the storm. He had clearly just come from the stables. "It was a request for more money," Anna said, her voice remarkably steady, "and a suggestion that you sponsor Cecilia next season." Arthur walked into the room, unbuttoning his heavy coat. He didn't look angry. He looked vaguely amused. "And what did you reply?" "I believe my reply is currently turning into soot," Anna said, gesturing to the fireplace. Arthur stopped in front of her. He looked at the fire, then back down at her. The amusement faded, replaced by that intense, stripping gaze she had first encountered in a dark library in London. You burned it. I did. You did not calculate a compromise. You did not ask my permission to send them a fraction of the funds. The transaction is complete, Arthur, Anna said. She stepped closer to him, entirely unbothered by the cold dampness of his coat. She looked up into his face. I'm not their ledger anymore. I'm yours. It was the most vulnerable thing she had ever said. It hung in the quiet room, stark and true. Arthur let out a ragged breath. He reached out and pulled her against him, his arms wrapped around her back, pulling her flush against his chest. The cold wool of his coat contrasted sharply with the heat of his body beneath it. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in like she was oxygen. You are not a ledger, Anna, he said fiercely, his voice vibrating against her collarbone. You are not a transaction. You are the only real thing in my life. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His hands moved to cup her face, his thumbs wiping away a stray smudge of soot from her cheek. When I walked into that ballroom, Arthur confessed, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I was suffocating. And then I saw you standing in the shadows, looking at the entire glittering room like it was a cheap parlor trick. You were entirely yourself. You didn't bend. You didn't perform. Anna felt a hot tear slip down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I didn't come for your sisters, Anna, he said, repeating the words that had altered the course of her life. But this time, they weren't a challenge thrown at a crowded room. They were a vow spoken into the quiet sanctuary they had built together. I came for the woman in the dark. I came for my wife. Anna reached up, wrapping her hands over his wrists. She didn't have poetry. She didn't have flowery metaphors. She only had the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had finally found exactly where she was supposed to be. Then you are a very fortunate man, Your Grace, she whispered, a small, genuine smile breaking across her face, because she has absolutely no intention of leaving. Arthur kissed her. It was not a polite, transactional kiss. It was desperate, grounding, and absolute. It tasted of winter air, wood smoke, and the profound, quiet victory of two cynics who had accidentally built a kingdom out of dust. Outside, the Yorkshire snow continued to bury the moors, harsh and unforgiving. But inside Stonecross Hall, standing by the fire, Anna was finally undeniably warm. Did Anna and Arthur's journey from a cynical transaction to a deeply grounded love story capture your heart? If you enjoyed this escape from the glittering, superficial ballrooms of London into the harsh, healing reality of Yorkshire, please hit the like button. Share this video with fellow historical drama lovers who appreciate a heroine who fights with ledgers instead of tears, and a hero who values substance over perfection. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another original romance story. Let us know in the comments, would you have burned the letter?